It's 1600 CET on the hour. Welcome everyone to this webinar. Could your company be a climate solutions company? Organized by Exponential Roadmap Initiative and Oxford Net Zero. My name is Andrea Lindblom, and I'm head of communications here at Exponential Roadmap Initiative. So we all see and we feel our planet heating up. It was usually warm and humid in southern West Africa last month, February. In Europe, February was wetter than normal. It brought with it heavy storms and rainfall. And then looking forward in time and over to the US, well, above average temperatures are predicted there from April through to June. So I think by now we know that we have a problem, but we also know that we have the solutions. That's what the UN body for climate change, the IPCC, told us just over a year ago. There are multiple feasible and effective options to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and to secure a livable future for all. Companies, you guys, you play a great role here because you innovate, you disrupt, you transform, you develop and scale solutions. So let's talk climate solutions today. Exponential Roadmap Initiative with a mission to halve global emissions by 2030 and Oxford Net Zero, a cross-disciplinary initiative at the University of Oxford. We have teamed up and proposed criteria for what makes a product or service a climate solution and for what makes a company a climate solutions company. So our speakers today are Axelsson of Oxford Net Zero, Johan Falk of the Exponential Roadmap Initiative. And then we hear from three companies. We hear from H2 Green Steel, from Oatly, that produces alternatives to dairy products. And then, to some this may come as a surprise, from the Swedish fast food chain, Max Burgers. And for better overview, the agenda, you'll see that towards the end, we want to hear from you. We want to hear your questions. Do you have a climate solution? Would you define it differently? Would you have a different bar for what makes a company, a climate solutions company? So please make notes of any questions that may arise throughout the presentations that you'll see coming up now. And we'll get them answered for you right towards the last quarter or 20 minutes or so of this webinar. But now I'd like to hand over to Johan Falk.
Thank you, Andrea. Brilliant introduction. So, why is it so essential to put the focus on and define climate solutions? Well, as Andrea mentioned, we are in a climate and biodiversity crisis. We know that to minimize the overshoot of 1.5 degrees, we should halve emissions by 2030 and reach net zero by latest 2050 while protecting and restoring nature. However, in order to phase out the fossil economy, we can't just focus on the down curves on the left. We need to scale up climate solutions and shift these curves to the left. But to do that, we also need clear definitions, which is essential to identify the right products and services. And we are convinced that this can incentivize companies to set science-aligned climate solutions, growth targets, and also develop and attract more substantial funding to scale up climate solutions exponentially. And that is illustrated in the next slide. So as we all know, companies set targets and plans to drive down their value chain emissions, scope 1, 2, 3, as we can see on the left. And we do argue that it's essential for companies to also set the science-aligned targets for scaling up climate solutions, shifting its complete portfolio towards these solutions over time. And for climate solutions, we need to apply another rationale. They should in many cases apply intensity-based carbon emission targets rather than absolute targets, because we need to scale these solutions exponentially. It's also important to note that companies are primarily motivated by up curves rather than down curves. This is also a way to align companies' growth targets with climate and nature. The principles we suggest and are applying is related to the global carbon law, as we can see on the next slide. The carbon law was published 2017 by leading scientists, and also is sort of the foundation of the UN Race to Zero and many other initiatives, and published by Johan Rockström. It states that we need to halve emissions every 10 years while protecting and restoring nature and carbon sinks. So to be considered a climate solution, according to our principles, a solution should have a significantly lower carbon footprint through the life cycle compared to the business as usual solution. At least 50% lower, preferably 75 or 90%. This would mean the green part of this picture, as you can see. And you can also state that the climate solution needs to be more than 10 years ahead of the curve. And a few examples on the next slide. So an EV, an electrical vehicle, could be considered a climate solution, possibly yesterday, but in the near term, as you can see, it also needs to be built by circular or fossil-free material, and most probably also shared as part of a mobility as a service. The next example I have on the slide is near zero steel, which has significantly lower footprint than ordinary steel, 90% in this example, and could qualify as a climate solution. And the final example could be a plant-based food, which could qualify as a climate solution. And we will hear more of these specific examples later today. And with that introduction, I will hand over to Kaja Axelsson from Oxford Net Zero to further talk about both the how, but also go a bit deeper into the principles.
And unfortunately, one of our, let's say, main characters here, Kaja, is missing, I understand. We're therefore handing this over to Claire Wake of Exponential Roadmap Initiative, who has also worked on the criteria. So over to you, Claire. And this is going to be slightly tricky because Claire and I are actually in the same room. And so she would have to be using the microphone from my computer to not completely mess up add echo and sound here for everyone. So bear with us. Claire, you can, I think, look into your computer so you see the slides, and I'll just move a tiny little bit closer to you. So that's what the live situation is. I learned in television. There's no such thing as perfect if it's live. So bear with us. Maybe just Claire, you can take a bit of a different perspective as to why there is a need to define climate solutions.
Yes, so nice to be here and great that everyone's joined us today. The picture that you see on your screen there is a report that was written by Kaja and others. I think it was published last year, and it's saying, you know, what's missing here. The thought that we have focused a lot on reductions of greenhouse gases and setting businesses accountable for that. But what have we missed in terms of them scaling up, in terms of them playing a new role in the systems changes that we need? So together with Oxford Net Zero, Exponential Roadmap, as has been mentioned, have developed some criteria which we're proposing, and I'm going to take you through that. But before I do so, if you go back one slide, Andrea, this one, yes. So we need to be clear what's in scope here and what's out of scope. When we were thinking what we could address by setting some criteria for qualifying climate solutions, we decided that material products and services, that's things like transport or hire of equipment or something, those should be in, but that we would be excluding consultancy and advisory services. And you should know that some other work is going on that under the Race to Zero umbrella. We also wanted to address transformational innovations and not incremental ones. So the criteria are intended to find the things that really make a huge difference. So that's on the left, on the inside scope, and on the out of scope, we have financial services, because they're really a different thing. They're funding the innovations we need rather than being the innovations in themselves. And we also, as I said, are excluding incremental innovations. So that's the scope, and I should say that we are in the concept phase, coming towards the end, I would say, of the concept phase here. If you think about a conveyor belt of moving ideas through to perhaps standardization and regulation. So here in front of you now, you see what we've come up with. We've come up with 3 potential ways to qualify a product or service as a climate solution. The first is that they make a big shift in the carbon emissions per functional unit, the footprint of the product or service. So they should have less than 50% of the current footprint of the replacement, the products or service they're replacing. That's the one on the blue. And then we thought another option would be products or services that enable others to make significant reductions. That's the green. And the third option would be that a product or service already meets today a threshold that has been rigorously and robustly quantified for what would fit in a net zero world when we have a carbon budget that fits the 1.5 degrees. So that's the 3 options, the blue, the green and the yellow there. But then we also have a number of safeguards we've developed, which each of these would have to be met. So the solution would have to be potentially scalable to the world's population, which we're thinking that maybe some high-end luxury products might not count in there. And then the products or service has to not enable the further use of virgin fossil fuels. So that's some things around vehicles, for instance, often. And then it should fulfill a basic human need. It should be aligned, which is a similar point, aligned with reaching the UN Sustainable Development Goals. And it should make no material negative impacts on nature or people. So those are the safeguards that we would want to see any proposed solution meeting as well. So if we go to the next slide, we think that there are probably some companies represented. Well, we know there are some companies represented in this call who would meet the kind of born to be green criteria. If you think about 2 types of companies, the ones who are already providing climate solutions, either products or services, and maybe were established in order to do so. So if you like, on the 2 types of climate solutions companies there on the right, we've got the ones that need to scale, and they're the green startups, for instance. But then there's also companies who are other companies represented today, surely, who might have products that you might consider would be brown. So they're kind of brown companies who need to be on a transformational path to only supply climate solutions. So how could they think about using these criteria? And that's what we're trying to illustrate in the diagram there. So if today your business has very few climate solutions, maybe, or maybe 1 or 2, then perhaps you're down on the left of that graph there, and the percentage of your revenue that comes from selling climate solutions is very low. But as these companies would move towards net zero, then they would transform their products and portfolio of products and services, moving up the green line, so that perhaps 100% eventually of their portfolio is their revenue is derived from these kinds of products. And that's as we get towards 2050. Other ways to use the KPI would be proportion of R&D spend, or just proportion of products. So that's what we're talking about when we come to defining a climate solutions company. So once we've identified which products or services could be defined as and qualified as climate solutions, we then move on to whether your company could be a climate solutions company. And there we're proposing 3 criteria that all have to be met. One is that over 90% of the revenue comes from climate solutions sales. The second, on the blue there, is that the company has done all the basics. So it's set robust climate targets that are published. It has a transition plan, and it's making progress towards that plan and reports on that. So that's covering the basic climate requirements. And then the third requirement would be that the company works more actively to transform its sector. So it's working beyond its own value chain, which many of the most advanced companies are doing so, to include others in the systems change required. And I think that's where I'm handing back.
Thanks so much, Claire. And just because I missed to introduce Claire before, yes, she is at Exponential Roadmap Initiative, and there she is the head of climate performance practice, for anyone who was wondering how come Claire is presenting this work that is partly hers. Hopefully Kaya Axelsson of Oxford Net Zero will be able to join us later for the Q&A part. And I do notice that there are some questions already in the chat. Thank you so much for that. We will come back to that at the towards the later part of this call. Now, I would like to take your pulse a little bit and ask you to scan the QR code there or type in the URL that you see on this slide, so menti.com, and then there is a code 83152357, and then you answer a simple question. I think my company has a climate solution, or maybe doesn't have a climate solution quite yet. And that's where my colleague Daniel, who's kindly helping with this call very much behind the stage, will be showing you the results of what everyone is thinking, whether they have a climate solution or maybe not quite yet. Daniel, do we have any answers coming in, or is everyone still dumbfounded by the...
No, we do. I'll swap in just a second, give everyone time to check it out.
So you've heard the criteria for climate solution products and services, for climate solutions companies. It's a lot to take in, but just as a gut reaction, do you think you have one? Or do you think you might need to transform your business a little bit? And we do have some almost 50 participants in this call. So I'm hoping everyone feels the urge after taking in all this information to just have their own thoughts around this and express them in this little short Mentimeter here. Daniel, what are we seeing?
You can see my screen right now?
No, not yet.
You can't?
Maybe I need to stop. I'll do that. There we go. Aha. All right. There is a lot of people here that are convinced that they have a climate solution. Well, considering that we would have 48 participants, maybe there's not that many, but at least we have 13 that think they have a climate solution and 5 that think, oh, maybe not quite yet. So that's great. And I want you to hold on to your thoughts on why you think this and maybe what your questions are around the criteria. And remember, we will get to this. But for now, I would like to give the floor to a company that has, or to someone that has answered this question. I think my company has a climate solution very decidedly with yes. And that's Johan Mandaric Reunanen of H2 Green Steel. The floor is yours, Johan. And I'll go back and share my screen.
Perfect. Thank
just
you.
A second.
Yeah, I mean, I did answer yes. I think my company has a climate solution. Thank you for the invitation, and thank you for the introduction. Great to see so many here.
I'm still working on screen sharing. While I do that, please, anyone who's not speaking, so basically anyone other than Johan and myself who is who's jumping in here now, great if you can mute yourselves. And I'll just have to go to do this, and then we're on again. Thanks for bearing with us, Johan.
Perfect. Don't you just love it when the technology works straight away?
Not 1 minute.
Yeah, so thank you so much for the invitation and for getting the opportunity to speak briefly about H2 Green Steel and what we do and why we are a climate solutions company and what that means to us. If I can get the next slide, please. So our mission is fairly, I mean, it's simple and difficult at the same time. It's simply that we decarbonize hard-to-abate industries. That is our sole purpose, and we start with the steel sector. And why is that? Why did we start with the steel sector? Well, because it's one of the dirtiest industries in the world. It accounts for roughly 8% of the global emissions. So we thought that would be a great way, a great place to start. Next slide. And we do that by building the world's first giga-sized green steel plant up in Boden that will produce 5 million tons of green steel annually. And this is powered by an electrolyzer. I don't know if 800 megawatts says anything to you, but that will also be the biggest in the world at its induction. That will produce green hydrogen to use in the downstream processing of the iron that goes into to making iron that we need for the steel making. And so the emissions, the vast majority of the emissions in the steel making is actually in the iron making. So that is why we use green hydrogen here instead of coal and coks that is used in the blast furnaces of the traditional steel making. And this means that we will be able to reduce the emissions of the steel making in total then with up to 95% compared to traditional steel or brown steel, as we like to call it. Having roughly, if you produce 1 ton of steel today in the normal setting, you emit somewhere around 2,500 kilos of CO2 per ton of steel. And only in your own scope 1 and 2, you emit roughly 2,200 kilos of CO2. So this is massive amounts of CO2 that's being emitted. Yeah, we can actually say with the so we do this in 2 phases. The first phase is 2.5 million tons, so half of the production. We will start production in roughly 2 years, end of 2025, beginning of 26. And we do this in close customer partnerships, and I will get back to that. Now we can jump to the next one. We need, of course, a lot of money for this. We're a startup. We've just been around for 3 years. We have no balance sheet. So we need to find the money to build this site elsewhere. So actually, the whole Boden plant is project financed. And we just closed this round to finance the whole Boden site at 6.5 billion euros in December of last year. And that was actually last year's biggest financing globally. And roughly 1/3 of this is from equity, and 2/3 is debt financing. And then we also have some grants added from the EU Innovation Fund, for example. But as you can see, it's a pretty big group of investors that are going in. Some of them are only investors, and some of them are investors and customers. And now, okay, so the commitments that we've made, as you could see, so we abate or we reduce the emissions by 95%. So really qualifying us for the 50% threshold of a climate solution. 100% of our sales will come from the sales of green steel. So that is that qualifier in the climate solutions company. We have done other commitments. So we've set net zero target for the Boden plant. So by 2040, the whole plant for all scopes 1, 2, and 3 will be net zero. We have also committed to cutting the carbon intensity in half by 2035. And we will not only focus on building the Boden site, that's our main focus right now, but in a couple of years' time, we will really kick in the expansion of new sites globally, looking at different sites currently in both Europe, North America and South America. And we do this we are a startup, as I said. We do this in very close collaboration with a lot of organizations. Exponential Roadmap being one, but also including civil society that are pushing the climate action agenda. A lot of policy work that has been done in EU, for example, really pushing for tougher climate targets and regulation. Next slide. And so why is Exponential Roadmap Initiative the right choice for us? Well, one thing, as I said, we are a project financed company or project, which means that we have had to secure offtake for the green steel in order for this site to be built. Right now, we have secured offtake for roughly 50% of the steel that is coming out of the Boden plant at start of production, and that is going in as collateral to the financing. Now, pretty much all of these companies are big existing companies, and they have pretty much all signed up to science-based targets. So that is driving the demand side for our steel. But for us as a company, we are much more aligned with the Exponential Roadmap Initiative's theory of change. So we want to be Paris aligned and part of Race to Zero without compromising our possibility to expand our climate solution, as Johan said. So the emissions intensity is much more important than the absolute emissions. If we would have an absolute emissions cap, then we would stop at Boden, not establishing new sites globally. We are also contributing to outside of our value chain by enabling decarbonization for the whole industry. A lot of these customers that are buying our steel, they want to decrease CO2 emissions. It has been successful to boost investor confidence. Some of them are still requiring SBTi targets, but we've had really good dialogues on why this is a better fit for us. And it's close to our mission and our platform. We also see the need urgently to scale up all existing solutions as fast as possible and in as many places as possible. Next slide. All right. We speak a lot about climate, of course. That is our first purpose, but we can't do this and completely ignore other sustainability topics. As you showed in the introduction, we need to safeguard other requirements as well. So last year we started double materiality analysis work, and we are continuing to do that now. And some of the topics that are really high up in materiality for us is, for example, biodiversity and ecosystems, safe and fair workplaces, diversity and inclusion, local community development, and a few others. And for us, that means that we will also qualify in doing no significant harm. We are, according to the taxonomy, green, which means that we have been scrutinized on all these different topics as well. Because, it wouldn't be, we can't save the climate and ruin everything else while doing it. So this is really important work for us. I think I will stop there. And,
thank you so much, Johan. And now we're switching sectors. I do hope anyone who has steel-related questions, and I'm sure that there are many, because this is a fascinating example that Johan just detailed. So do hold your questions or put them in the chat already. We'll be sure to look at that. But now we want to switch industry here really and go to a company that produces alternatives to dairy products from oats, and that's Oatly. Unfortunately, they couldn't make it today, but we talked to Caroline Reid and to Vasiliki Takou earlier, and we asked what makes plant-based foods a climate solution. And that video will now be shared by Daniel. And I think I will have to stop sharing my screen.
Correct.
Yeah, so 1/3 of all greenhouse gas emissions come from the food sector, and half of those are connected to the animal-based sector, even though very little calories and even protein come from animal-based foods. So science shows that if we shift to more plant-based eating, we can significantly reduce emissions from the food sector, and therefore plant-based foods are a climate solution.
What is your view of the criteria that the Exponential Roadmap Initiative, together with Oxford Net Zero, proposed for defining climate solutions, products, and services?
I mean, we think this is really interesting. And from a starting point, as a company like Oatly, our whole mission as a company is to therefore grow, to drive that conversion from cow's dairy to much less impactful oat-based products. And the climate frameworks that exist today don't work really, and don't work for a company like Oatly, that we actually need to grow significantly. And so what we think is really interesting about this criteria is actually reviewing companies and products from a different perspective, not just only about absolute reduction of scope 1 and 2 emissions and so on, but looking more of like, what is your impact more holistically in the world? And what does your products and your company drive in changing a bigger system? And so for us at Oatly, of course, it's about cow's milk. How do we drive that conversion and that reduce the impact from cow's milk by having that switch over to Oatly products?
So what are the challenges of meeting these criteria?
Right. So thankfully at Oatly, we have conducted so much research on our footprints. For example, we have started declaring our product climate footprint since 2019, and we have conducted multiple ISO LCA studies, so we know our hotspots. But I can imagine that for a company starting, it can be challenging to collect and maintain the data in the long term. So it takes a lot of effort and a lot of engagement internally to kind of quantify your impact. And hopefully, as data automation technologies will improve over time, that will become easier. But at the moment, it's very time-consuming and expensive to conduct LCAs, for example. And apart from your own company impact, you also need to quantify business as usual scenario, right? And that can be challenging too. In an ideal world, if everyone was declaring their climate footprints or footprints in general, it would be easier to say if the solution you're proposing is 50%, 70 or 90% better than the status quo. But now we have to kind of rely on scientific research or data, which it's a good start, but they're not always up to date, for example, or they are not updated so as fast as we would like them to. So there are some challenges there. Another challenge that I see that is the criteria, how can I say that? Being a little bit more generic at the moment, which is good when you start an initiative, that you kind of try to communicate the overarching principles. But in the long run, I think that there needs to be more guidelines on how exactly this criteria should be interpreted, so that we can assure that there is less room for interpretation between different practitioners and the results are more comparable between them.
Caroline, can you expand on how a definition of climate solutions can be an incentive and then essentially a benefit to reducing emissions?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I mean, Obviously, a lot of companies today are incrementally changing their business models, but we know to really keep global warming within 1.5 degrees, we need to see major business transformation to climate solution products and so on. And right now, the way climate frameworks are set up, and we basically are recognizing companies that have that kind of incremental reduction on their absolute footprints. And so if you then move into an area where you are developing climate solutions, and it's an area where you actually need to significantly grow, but somewhere else, from a holistic world perspective, you know, it reduces emissions within a sector. You as a company can actually start to penalize you, because it's actually in the short term could start to increase your footprint again. So basically, I think being able to really put a label on the work you're doing with climate solutions is a positive, is not positive, but it's what's the word? You know, you're recognized for the work you're doing and the contribution you have to keeping the world within 1.5. I do think that can be an incentive within companies to take steps in this area.
Thank you, Carolyn, Reid, and Vasiliki, Takou of Oatly, for having agreed to contribute to this webinar, even though we had to record this, and I do apologize for the rather poor technical quality of this. We stay with foods, and I'd like to give the floor to Kai Török of Max Burgers.
Thank you very much.
More or less successfully try to share the screen again, but go ahead, Kai.
Yeah, and for those of you who are not from Sweden, Max Burgers is a family-owned Swedish burger chain. We are, in our own market, smaller than McDonald's, but actually bigger than Burger King. So we have grown here, and we've been working with sustainability since many years. And I'm waiting for the presentation.
It'll be there, don't worry.
So we've started our climate work really in 2008. We did. We created the world's first climate labeled menu. We started measuring the footprint. We started to have high quality carbon offsets for removals, and so on. But next, what we have is a number of different alternatives on our menu. So you can choose a burger, classical beef burger with 4.3 kilo carbon dioxide, or you can do the crispy supreme sandwich. So you can reduce your carbon footprint with 90%. And you will do that if you think it tastes great. Next one. So in 2008, we launched the world's first climate labeled menu. So today it's marked with low CO2e. That means that it's 1 kilo carbon dioxide equivalent per meal, and that's because the Swedish average is 2, so we think that's in one way climate solution. But I'm going to suggest something else next. So we have reduced our carbon footprint by 30% according to Cool Food Meals and World Resource Institute behind that, and that is calculated as per 1,000 kilocalories. And we think that's a better measurement than total emissions for the same reason as, for example, Oatly and H2 Green Steel mentioned, that we can replace other stuff. Next. So our main climate goal is by 2050, 0.66 kilo carbon dioxide equivalents per 1,000 kilocalories. And we have calculated that by combining the global boundary for climate emissions from food production and the caloric needs of a healthy diet. So then we really connected to what people need. People need calories to eat, to survive, and they need to be healthy. And we think that this goal assessment is well aligned with science and most relevant frameworks. I think they will look a little bit different. So maybe some will come up with 0.5 and some other will come up with 0.8 or something like that. But it's in general well aligned. So next. And this is actually something that I'm working on right now. So and it's I love to share stuff before they're finished. because it means I get input, but also it takes time to develop these things. So the next climate label might be a climate score. I don't know. But if that's the case, we could put the 0.66 I talked about as a green one, and then 5.27 as an E. So you see here, there's an exponential increase by every, so it's the exponential thinking here. And it actually actually connects to the decades as well. So you could say B is 2040 compatible. And examples from Max, what kind of food could that be? So a Crispy Supreme, it's a fully plant-based burger, but in B, it's a Grand Chicken sandwich, and in C, it's a Frisco meal. It actually includes meat, and D is a Frisco burger without the fries and other stuff. But I think then, if I would, how I interpret the climate solutions, that next click, that maybe the category A and B would be fine to put as climate solutions. And if we did it something like that, we can click another one. We could probably at max, create a new goal, which is aligned. So by 2030, 50% of sold products should be climate solutions, for example. And then we can work at that. So then we have one goal, which is kind of science-based and expressed in that way. And the other goal, this one, is more connected to what can the organization do now, and how can they understand how to drive sales of the right things. And with all that said, I would just like to remind people that it's so easy to be a little bit itchy-fingered about putting requirements and guardrails and stuff on all of these things that we want to do. But I think from my experience working with sustainability since the 90s is that if you put too much perfection into something, it won't happen. So we need to first crawl, to then walk, to then run. So just be careful of not hindering the right thing of happening now, and instead of the perfect thing later. Thank you.
Oops. Thank you so much, Kai. And I like the analogy there with the crawl, from going from crawling to walking to running, even though at this point in time and where we stand on climate, I do wish that we were all ready to be running already.
Should have been 40 years ago. So, but
thank you everyone for their presentations. We're both Kai and Johan, Mandaric, Reunanen of H2 Green Steel, and also Johan Falk of Exponential Roadmap, and now also Kaja Axelsson of Oxford Net Zero are available for questions. So please, anyone who has a question and you're still thinking about it, please, try to put them in the chat or raise your hand, whatever. You're absolutely welcome to go on camera and ask questions. The first question that I will take here is one that has come up already earlier, and that goes away from the food question or food sector back to industry. Would sustainable aviation fuel potentially be a climate solution? And what other examples are you seeing in practice? That would go to Johan and Kaja.
Kaja, do you want to answer first?
You'd like to start, Kaja? Then I can fill in.
It's great to see you all. And I love that we're even doing that thought experiment about what is a climate solution and testing the framework. Frameworks are only as good as their application. So sustainable aviation fuel, I suppose we could look at a safeguard. Does it meet a core human need? I think that there are some instances in which flying is definitely a core human need, at least particularly in medical instances. And I think, let's just be practical. People want to travel around the world and have to for many reasons. So I think it does satisfy that safeguard. I think that it could significantly reduce emissions from flying. I think there is maybe some questions about the safeguard around nature and the way that sustainable aviation fuel is produced. So I think it probably depends on how it's produced. I'm curious what others think. This is just me thinking out loud, I think. Johan, what do you think?
I would say potentially, yes. I think we should practically run these cases practically. So I would say potentially, yes.
Thanks. And I would like to take one other question here that also came up in the chat, where that remarks on oat, where you substitute one food for another, or plant-based solutions instead of dairy products. But the question then is, would then producing oats be a climate solution in itself? So there would be many sectors like that. Espen Brandt comments, wood instead of steel, concrete, cardboard instead of plastic. So who do you see producing low carbon raw materials that could help the planet transition, and would they all be a climate solutions company? It might be a little bit philosophical. So another one for Johan, Falk, and Kai Axelsson, I would say. I do just want, before I let you answer, I do want to call on everyone to come up with questions to Kai and Johan of Max Burgers and H2 Green Steel respectively, because this is your chance to ask these companies how they did it and doing it in a little bit more detail. So have another think on that. But back to the question of is then producing oats already a climate solution?
Again, I think it depends on how you produce the oats, right? A part of what we've established within the framework is that you have to be thoughtful about your emissions in the process of, even if you're providing a product that will replace a heavier emitting product. First of all, you'd have to kind of show that you're able to replace that. Because one of the challenges we see, especially in the credit market, is that there's lack of additionality, or that something is not in fact replacing the heavy emitting process. But then I think you also need to make sure that your emissions are not spiking and that they are in line with net zero pathways within that industry, even if sort of the end product does result in lower emissions at end use. So I think potentially, especially in really innovative uses where you can really show that delta between emissions from the product or initially used and the product being used to replace that.
Thanks, Kai. I think I have another one for you, actually. That is not even a question, it's a statement. So I ask you to engage with that one. Nature-based solutions are all climate solutions.
I think that depends on how, first of all, I think that depends on if we're just using nature-based solutions not as a proper noun. I think if you're just throwing around the term nature-based solutions without following the Nature-Based Solutions Initiative principles and like really engaging in community adaptive management, really engaging with the kind of long-term financing that is needed to support nature-based projects, really ensuring that that is a rich ecosystem you're investing in and not just some monoculture plantation. Nature-based solutions are not just anything that helps the climate that has some nature in it, right? Nature-based solutions is a well-defined term. I'm seeing nodding, so I'm preaching to the choir here, but it's an important distinction. And then I suppose then it really depends on how you're using it. If you are using it as an offset, are there unintended consequences associated with that? If you're using it towards a nature target, then yeah, I think potentially, definitely. So yeah, all proper nature-based solutions are climate solutions. I think I could say that. Go out on a limb.
Thank you, Kai. I now like to, since I see no questions, hands so far, I want to pick on someone that I know is in this call, but in a slightly noisy environment and might not be able to go on camera, but potentially able to bring in an important perspective, and that is Dan Ferger of the Venture Climate Alliance. Dan, would you be able to share any perspectives there from the perspective of a venture capitalist? What's your view on climate solutions?
Thank you so much, Andrea, and thank you all for the amazing work that you've done at Oxford and Exponential Roadmap. I am indeed the co-founder and lead advisor to this GFANS Alliance that is about a year old. called the Venture Climate Alliance. It is a member of the Race to Zero and consists of early stage investors focusing on both general startups across every sector of the economy and in particular climate technologies and climate solutions oriented companies. I hope you can all hear me okay, by the way. Please just nod. Okay, great. The VCA is designed and is being managed and run by venture capital investors who have a very unique and important role to play in backing many of the companies that are scaling the solutions. Of course, many of the companies we just heard from today have investors who are either members of the VCA or could be members of the VCA. I'm really pleased to say that your approach and what you laid out in the concept note in December, as well as what we talked about here today, is indeed very consistent with the way that the VCA is approaching this work. And great to see H2 think very clearly about both its own contribution to the decarbonization of the real economy through the products that it sells, as well as, Johan, your own commitment to doing the hard work of decarbonizing your business as you scale and grow. And that's exactly the way that we're thinking about it at the VCA. So I think there's a lot of alignment. The key thing that I want to name, which is fantastic that H2 Green Steel has done this extra bonus points work, is that not every early stage company, especially very early, is able to do the work just from a bandwidth and internal expertise perspective.
Wait, it sounds a little bit like you went missing there, Dan, and that might have to do with that the Wi-Fi wherever you were, I believe, in transit dropped. We'll try to get back to that later. Daniel, if you can, Dan, are you there? Let me just give it one try. No. Let's put the question to Kai there that we see in the chat. How did consumer demand inform your creation of the climate labeled menu? And do you think being able to claim being a climate solutions company then could help, or rather maybe climate solutions product in that case, could help boost your market share?
Yeah, so this was in 2008, and I would say the consumer demand was kind of zero at that time. And so we did it because we understood that we couldn't sell those kind of products with lower climate impact without the help of the guests. They need to understand what's low and what's high. At that time, people were not even generally aware of that beef had a really high climate impact. So we had to inform the guests. And I think that it has helped to create our market share, absolutely. The climate labeling and, of course, everything else that we've been doing. I think that the climate solutions could help boost our market share, maybe. But even more importantly, it could help transform what we sell. So it could shift that if we do it properly. And I'm always thinking about what kind of theory of change do I have here? How is the world going to fix the climate? And I do believe that the diffusion of innovation by Everett Rogers and others that state that you have to transform maybe 20-25% of a market before it goes from very niche groups to early majority, and then we win. So I think if what the climate solutions could be so clear and understandable to the consumers, our guests, that they want to do it, it adds value to them. Yeah, maybe then we can move in that direction. So, but that also means that it has to be something they can choose from. So if we would do it just with one organic plant-based burger and nothing else, if you put the guardrails too high, it's going to be hard to get enough nice tasting products out there to create the change. So my theory of change is always trying to go up to the 20-25%, at least. Long answer.
That's fine. Thank you, Kai. I do want to come in with one question to Johan, Falk, and to Kaja Axelsson, and that would be remarking on the fact that all of the companies that we have represented here today are based in Sweden, so very much in Northern Europe, in the global north. But we do have people on the call here from Ghana, from other parts of the world, outside of Sweden. And I would like to ask you, Kaja and Johan, what your thoughts are on basically the applicability of the criteria to companies that might be in different situations in other parts of the world.
Yeah, I'm delighted by this question because this is actually the origin story of the climate solutions agenda in our research program in the first place. We felt that the net zero frame on its own was no longer, or actually never, sufficiently motivating nor relevant to those with the least historic responsibility in parts of the world that have to grow parts of their economy to meet their sustainable development goals. And so we felt it was really opportunity to provide a really positive frame for entrepreneurs. In particular, I was speaking with entrepreneurs who we host in Oxford from across Africa who wanted to engage in climate solutions, but didn't really see their interests and their framing anywhere in the standards landscape or the kind of mainstream global north climate narratives. And so we developed these with those kind of perspectives in mind. And I think maybe there's aspects of the criteria that still require emissions reduction trajectories somewhat in line with global IEA pathways as you're scaling your kind of climate solutions company. And yes, you would probably be treated differently in terms of how you interpret your responsibility under that global emissions reduction pathway if you are in a part of the world that has less historic responsibility and that needs to scale its economy faster. And that's just where the language around, that we see in lots of the standards now that kind of acknowledges common but differentiated responsibility and acknowledges a fair share of global, net zero is where that would come in. But it's a really good challenge for us to review the framework and kind of make sure we've made that clear, because while that was very much a part of our original rationale for even writing the climate solutions framework, perhaps we could be a bit more clear in our second round of publishing.
Thank you so much, Kaja. And with a view here to the fact that we're just 3 minutes out before we're hitting the full hour, I'd like to turn to Johan Falk to explain what the next steps are, because obviously this doesn't end at this webinar. So Johan, do you want to just hang on? I'll show the slide so that people know what you're talking about. And this does take a minute to load. There we go. Johan, your ask to our participants.
Thank you. And so what are the next steps? And thank you for all the brilliant presentations from our guests. Well, firstly, we are closing the brilliant open consultation on the criteria by March 31. So you have still an opportunity to contribute to that open consultation, so please do that. And the plan is to go out with a publication of the updated criteria in May. And in the next step, Exponential Roadmap Initiative, we are applying the criteria for existing ERI companies, and when we onboard new companies to ERI and Race to Zero. And we do this in close dialogue with Oxford Net Zero and the Race to Zero expert peer review group, because we need to be pretty rigorous when we're setting these criteria and fully transparent. So this is important. And we need to develop some of these guidelines as we go, as was mentioned, without overcomplicating these principles, which I think is also incredibly important, so we can achieve maximum impact. But the intention is also to align with other initiatives like SBTI and the finance initiatives, as we heard about previously, and of course to influence the long-term standards as well. But we need to implement and move fast at the same time. Thank you, Andrea.
And thank you, Johan. And with that, we have hit 1700 CET. We do hope that you enjoyed this webinar, that you learned a lot in it, that it's given you food for thought, that you reflect on what you've heard, that you contribute to the consultation. As Johan said, you can find everything on our website, exponentialroadmap.org/climate-solutions. So go and check that out. Thank you very much indeed. Kaja Axelsson, Oxford Net Zero, Johan Mandaric Reunanen of H2 Green Steel, Kai Török of Max Burgers, and also Caroline Reid and Vasiliki Takou of Oatly for presenting your company's perspective. So with that said, thank you very much from Exponential Roadmap Initiative and from Oxford Net Zero for joining this webinar, and hope to see you again in this conversation on climate solutions.